Genghis Khan died in August 1227 at roughly 65 during the siege of Yinchuan in what is now northern China. Mongol records state he died from injuries after falling from his horse while hunting, though later legend claims a captured princess fatally wounded him. His body was carried back to Mongolia in total secrecy, and anyone who witnessed the funeral procession was reportedly killed to keep his burial site unknown to this day. Attila the Hun died in March 453 AD at 47, on the night of his wedding to a Germanic bride named Ildiko. Ancient sources describe a night of heavy feasting followed by a severe nosebleed. Too intoxicated to wake, he is said to have drowned in his own blood. Some historians instead suspect a ruptured esophageal varix from chronic drinking, or even quiet assassination, since no contemporary account can be fully trusted.
William the Conqueror died on September 9, 1087 at 59 after his horse reared while he besieged the town of Montes, driving the saddle's iron pommel into his abdomen. He lingered in agony for weeks before dying of the internal injuries. At his funeral, his corpse had swollen so badly that it burst open as attendants forced it into an undersized stone sarcophagus, filling the church with an unbearable stench. Timur, known in the West as Tamerlane, died on February 18, 1405 at 68 while leading his army toward Ming China through brutal winter cold, succumbing to fever and exhaustion. In 1941, Soviet archaeologists opened his tomb despite an inscription warning of catastrophe if disturbed. Days later, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa against the USSR, a coincidence still cited as proof of the curse, though no causal link has ever existed.
Alexander the Great died in Babylon on June 10, 323 BC, at just 32, after days of fever and worsening paralysis following a prolonged bout of heavy drinking with his officers. He reportedly remained mentally alert as his body failed him. Some modern physicians propose Guillain-Barré syndrome, a paralytic illness that can mimic death, raising the unsettling possibility that he was still alive when prepared for burial.
Cyrus the Great died around 530 BC, roughly 60 years old, during a hard-fought campaign against the nomadic Massagetae along Persia's northeastern frontier. Herodotus recounts that Queen Tomyris, avenging her son's death in the fighting, had Cyrus's corpse beheaded and his head thrust into a skin filled with human blood, telling him to finally drink his fill of the bloodshed he had spent a lifetime causing.
Suleiman the Magnificent died of natural causes on September 6, 1566 at 71, during the siege of Sigetvar in Hungary, likely the last great campaign of his long reign. To prevent panic and hold the army together, his Grand Vizier, Sokollu Mehmed Pasha, concealed the death for 48 days, embalming the body and propping it upright in his tent, so troops would believe the Sultan still watched over the siege.
Harold Hardrada, Norway's last great Viking king, died at 51 at the Battle of Stamford Bridge in September 1066, fighting to claim the English throne. Overheated in the sun while battling Anglo-Saxon forces, he removed his chainmail for freer movement and was struck in the throat by an arrow, dying almost instantly. His defeat is often marked by historians as the symbolic end of the Viking Age in England. Shaka Zulu was assassinated at 41 on September 22, 1828, stabbed by his half-brothers Dingana and Malangana, along with a trusted servant named Mbopa. His grip on power had grown erratic and violent after his mother Nandi's death plunged the king into grief and paranoia. His body was reportedly dumped without ceremony into an empty grain storage pit, rather than given the royal burial his conquests had earned him.
Ivan the Terrible died in Moscow on March 18, 1584 at 53, collapsing suddenly while setting up a game of chess with an attendant. Chroniclers describe years of declining health, and 20th century exhumation of his remains found mercury levels high enough to suggest chronic poisoning or heavy medicinal use, though whether this directly triggered the fatal stroke remains disputed among historians to this day.
Francisco Pizarro was assassinated in his palace in Lima on June 26, 1541, at 63, ambushed by supporters of his former partner Diego de Almagro, whom Pizarro had earlier had executed. Overwhelmed and mortally wounded in the throat, he reportedly drew a cross on the floor in his own blood and kissed it as he died, according to accounts later written by chroniclers of the Spanish conquest of Peru who had known him personally.
Charlemagne died on January 28, 814 at 71 from pleurisy after a lifetime of relatively robust health for a man of his era. Medieval chronicler Einhard records that he was buried the same day, seated upright on a throne inside Aachen Cathedral, dressed in full imperial regalia with a crown on his head and a copy of the Gospels resting on his lap, as though still presiding silently over his empire. Babur, founder of the Mughal Empire, died on December 26, 1530 at 47, shortly after his eldest son Humayun recovered from a life-threatening fever. Court chronicles claim Babur circled his dying son's bed praying to transfer the illness onto himself and fell seriously ill soon afterward. Modern historians generally treat this as devotional legend rather than a literal documented medical cause of Babur's death.
Kamehameha the Great died on May 8, 1819 at roughly 61, having spent decades unifying the Hawaiian Islands under a single rule. Following tradition meant to protect his mana, or spiritual power, from desecration by enemies, his closest attendants secretly cleaned his bones and hid them in a cave under cover of darkness. The exact location has never been found and remains one of Hawaii's enduring secrets. Julius Caesar was assassinated on March 15, 44 BC, at 55, stabbed 23 times by a group of Roman senators, including his protege Brutus, during a Senate meeting near the Theater of Pompey. Ancient historian Suetonius records that physicians later determined only one wound was fatal. Caesar's death triggered over a decade of civil war that ultimately ended the Roman Republic and gave rise to the empire.
Pompey the Great was assassinated on September 28, 48 BC, at 58, after fleeing to Egypt following his crushing defeat by Julius Caesar at Pharsalus. Ptolemy XIII's advisors, hoping to win Caesar's favor, had him stabbed as he stepped ashore near Alexandria and beheaded on the spot. His wife Cornelia reportedly watched the killing helplessly from their ship before his headless body was left on the beach.
Xerxes I of Persia was assassinated in August 465 BC in his own bedchamber at Persepolis by Artabanus, the commander of his royal bodyguard and a trusted court official. Ancient sources say Artabanus then framed Xerxes' son Darius for the murder and had him executed, before being killed himself soon after by another royal son, Artaxerxes, who then seized the throne amid the ensuing succession crisis.
Pyrrhus of Epirus died in 272 BC, around 46, during chaotic street fighting in the Greek city of Argos. Wounded by a spear, he turned to strike his attacker when an elderly woman watching from a rooftop hurled a heavy roof tile that struck him in the head. Dazed or already dying, he was then beheaded by an enemy soldier, ending the career of the general whose costly victories gave rise to the term Pyrrhic victory. Hannibal Barca died around 183 BC, near 64, at Labissa in Bithynia, where he had fled after decades of relentless Roman pursuit following his earlier defeat at Zama. Cornered by Roman forces demanding his surrender, he swallowed poison he reportedly carried hidden in a ring, choosing death over capture. He's said to have remarked that he was finally freeing the Romans from the long anxiety of hunting an old man.
Vlad III, known as Vlad the Impaler, died in battle near Bucharest in December 1476 at around 45, fighting Ottoman forces and rival claimants to the Wallachian throne he had ruled on and off for years. Accounts differ on the exact circumstances, but his severed head was reportedly sent to Constantinople and displayed on a stake, a grim inversion of the impalement tactics he was infamous for using on his own enemies.
Mehmed the Conqueror died on May 3, 1481, at 49, while leading his army out of Constantinople on a new campaign, likely from gout or a related illness that had plagued him for years. Persistent rumors at the time claimed his personal physician had poisoned him, possibly at the instigation of his son Bayezid, though no conclusive evidence has ever confirmed the poisoning theory that still circulates among historians. Richard the Lionheart died on April 6, 1199, at 41, from gangrene after a crossbow bolt struck his shoulder during a minor siege at Chalus-Chabrol in France. He reportedly pardoned the young crossbowman who had wounded him before dying, but his mercenary captain had the man flayed alive and hanged anyway once Richard was gone, disregarding the dying king's explicit wish for mercy to be shown toward his own killer. Nader Shah of Persia was assassinated on June 19, 1747, at 58, stabbed to death in his tent at Fatabad by his own officers, who feared his growing paranoia and rumored plans for a purge. He managed to kill 2 attackers before being fatally wounded, and, according to tradition, begged for mercy from his killer, Salah Beg, who refused, saying Nader had shown none in life and therefore deserved none in death.
Napoleon Bonaparte died on May 5, 1821, at 51, in exile on the remote South Atlantic island of St. Helena. The official autopsy listed stomach cancer as the cause, mirroring his father's death years earlier. Persistent modern analysis of preserved hair samples showing elevated arsenic levels has fueled a lasting theory that he was slowly poisoned, though most historians attribute it to period wallpaper dyes or medicine.
Tipu Sultan, known as the Tiger of Mysore, died on May 4, 1799 at 48, defending his capital Seringapatam against a besieging British East India Company army. He was killed fighting near a breach in the fortress walls rather than fleeing to safety, and his body was found the next day among his slain soldiers. His defeat marked the end of Mysore's independent resistance to expanding British colonial power in India.